Legal expert Ulrich Roux from BDK Attorneys. Ulrich, thank you so much for joining us. Now, the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shaun Abrahams, is fighting to keep his job in the Constitutional Court. Is this a winnable case?
Yes, well, it certainly is interesting, and upon having regard to the arguments preferred today, it is clear that Mr. Abrahams' case is that he cannot be a party who now suffers at the hand of the unlawful appointment of the previous director of the National Prosecuting Authority. But be that as it may, I think a strong case is made out by the parties who have brought this application to have the appointment of Mr. Nxasana set aside. And of course, in law, if that appointment is set aside or the deal that he accepted is set aside, then Mr. Abrahams' appointment should never have taken place. And unfortunately for him, it will have to be set aside. It is a logical result of the deal which Mr. Nxasana accepted being set aside, is that Mr. Abrahams should never have been appointed as the head of the National Prosecuting Authority. So certainly a very interesting case before the Constitutional Court, and it will be a very telling judgment being handed down by them.
Now, Ulrich, what other factors inform the High Court decision apart from Nxasana's issue?
Well, they had to take all of the factors into consideration. You know, the manner in which he was so-called dismissed and the manner in which he accepted his so-called golden handshake. We, of course, heard all of the evidence presented and argued today before the Constitutional Court as to how Mr. Zuma, when he was still president of the country, put pressure on Mr. Nxasana and how he ultimately could no longer bear that pressure, and how he felt that it could be equationed to a constructive dismissal that he was subjected to. He had no choice but to accept the so-called golden handshake and step down. And all of these factors certainly will be taken into consideration by the Constitutional Court. So just to refresh everyone's memories, the High Court found that the deal which he accepted should never have taken place. It was unlawful. He should never have received the 17 million odd rand which he did in order to step down, and that the appointment of Mr. Abrahams should never have taken place. And Mr. Abrahams, of course, has now taken that decision on appeal to the Constitutional Court. And President Zuma at the time, of course, no longer president, also appealed that decision. But subsequent to his resignation and Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa becoming president, that appeal has been withdrawn. So the president is no longer involved in this matter. It is now only Mr. Abrahams who is fighting for his appointment to be regarded as a lawful one as the head of the NPA.
Now, while these appeals are unfolding, Shaun Abrahams is expected to announce whether President Jacob Zuma will face prosecution charges related to the arms deal. Do you see him ruling and having these charges reinstated, especially now? Well, we heard yesterday that he had made a decision, but unfortunately he needs to give a 2-week grace period in terms of CASAC. You know, one can now only hope that the Constitutional Court judgment is handed down before that 2-week period lapses. You know, the result that we could be faced with is that he makes a decision either to prosecute Jacob Zuma or not. But if his appointment is subsequently set aside, then that decision to prosecute Jacob Zuma would obviously be scrutinized, and there could be an argument that the new head of or National Director of Public Prosecution should take that decision afresh. So certainly interesting times and close deadlines that we are facing. He will be able to make public his decision within 2 weeks' time. And as I said, if the Constitutional Court hasn't ruled within that period, then we could be faced with an anomaly and a possible setting aside of the decision either to prosecute Jacob Zuma or not. Now, Ulrich, what happens if the Constitutional Court doesn't make a decision within the 2-week period? Well, as I said, then unfortunately one could expect that there will be opposition to the decision made, either to prosecute Jacob Zuma or not, because the argument will be that the decision to prosecute him or not prosecute him was taken by Shaun Abrahams, and depending on the ruling of the Constitutional Court, his appointment could be set aside or enforced. Now, if it is set aside, then the argument will obviously be there that he was never entitled to make that decision to prosecute Jacob Zuma or not. So interesting how things are going to unfold.
Yeah. Shaun Abrahams has denied the fact that he has been trying to protect, or allegations that he's been trying to protect former President Jacob Zuma. What's your take on this? Did he or did he not try to protect former President Zuma?
Well, one must look at his entire stint as the National Director of Public Prosecutions and the decisions that he has made during his period as the head of the National Prosecuting Authority. He, of course, was at the helm of the decision to prosecute at the time, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Pravin Gordhan, which had disastrous results and effects on our economy and on investors' confidence in our country, only to subsequently withdraw those charges, saying that his team had not conducted the investigation properly. Now, he was at the head of that team, so certainly I think there's no other way to describe that debacle as him having egg on his face, and the feud between Pravin Gordhan and Jacob Zuma is well documented. So that is where this all emanates from, is the fact that Shaun Abrahams was regarded as a pawn for Jacob Zuma, and obviously it is now his opportunity to either prove that allegation wrong or not. The political climate has changed a lot. As we all know, Jacob Zuma is no longer president. So will Shaun Abrahams now come out and show that he is objective and he will prosecute without fear or favor regardless of who the suspect or accused person is, or will he come out and show that, yes, his detractors have always been correct and that he does have allegiance towards Jacob Zuma, and only time will tell. Remember, he has not made the final decision yet, or he has not made it public. He claims that he has made the decision, but it has not been made public yet, so I don't think we can judge him yet. Let's wait and see what decision he does make. I think if he does make a decision not to prosecute Jacob Zuma, we could expect the opposition parties to launch High Court applications in order to have that decision reviewed once again. But the motto and the ethos of the NPA at the end of the day is to prosecute without fear or favor, and regardless of whether it's an ex-president, a current president, or Joe Soap on the street. If there's reasonable foreseeability of a successful prosecution against a person, and there's an allegation that that person did commit a crime, then it must be investigated and subsequently prosecuted.
Now, Ulrich, just in wrapping up, President Cyril Ramaphosa withdrew former President Zuma's appeal of the High Court decision and informed the court that he will not be taking part in Wednesday's, which is today's court proceedings. What do you make of this action? Well,
one must look at the decision as to why then President Jacob Zuma did decide to appeal it, and that was obviously because his powers to appoint the person who would prosecute him, or to appoint the new head National Director of Public Prosecutions, was taken away by the High Court last year. The High Court found that he could not decide who the new Director of Public Prosecutions was because of the fact that there were pending charges against him. Obviously, Cyril Ramaphosa has now reviewed that decision, and it is neither here nor there for the current president whether Jacob Zuma is prosecuted or not. I think his decision is 100% correct. It is an objective decision, and he leaves it in the hands of the NPA, as he should, which is also a completely independent and objective body. Once again, there's an allegation that a person committed a crime, and there's a reasonable foreseeability of a successful prosecution, then that person must be prosecuted. And President Cyril Ramaphosa has made the correct decision in law.
Ulrich, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for now. That was lawyer Ulrich Roux, director at BDK Attorneys, and he was joining us via Skype. Time now for a quick break.